When dementia starts changing someone you love, you may find yourself wondering what to do, what to say, and even what's going to happen next. That's why we invited Kristen Romea from Alzheimer San Diego to answer some of your questions. So today I want to welcome Kristen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm Valerie Upham, a certified senior advisor. And today we're going to talk about all the questions that people are wondering at different stages of either themselves having dementia or your parents having dementia. And there's a lot, because there's a lot can happen from stage 1 to stage 7. I think it kind of begins with when you notice that your loved one starting to be forgetful, or there's some changes maybe in their behavior and their personality, and you love this person and they're changing right in front of your eyes. So I think it would begin with conversations. Where do you think a family member, when is the right time to approach them, and how should those conversations begin?
That's a great question. I mean, when you start to notice those changes, especially with memory or personality, it's a good idea to have some sort of a conversation. And what that might look like depends upon whether the person that's experiencing the changes is aware. Some people who have memory loss, they will tell you that they are noticing the changes. They might be concerned about the changes or not, but that's an easier conversation. If they're noticing it, you can encourage them to go to the doctor and rule out other things that might be causing the issues.
Sure.
But if they're not noticing the changes and they're not aware, which is common, about half of people are not aware. They don't have that insight into what's going on with them. It's a little trickier. And families might need to come up with other reasons why it's a good idea to be evaluated by a doctor that aren't going to upset or alarm the person, if that makes sense.
I imagine it would be really scary to, first of all, be aware that you're changing, that you're being forgetful, that you've gotten lost on your way home, that you misplace things and you're doing it more frequently. Word recall issues, that's what my mother had. That was our beginning sign that we saw. And where do people go to get support to how to have those conversations, or even to be participatory in those conversations?
So there's a couple of different options. There's basically 2. You can go and speak with a professional. There's lots of nonprofits and different organizations here in San Diego that will provide free guidance on these types of things. Or you can speak to peers. Speaking to other people who have been caregivers or who are caregivers, that's sometimes the most valuable information you can get, because they've been in your shoes before and they've had to do this before.
So let's break it down with people who are aware that they're being forgetful, and then we can talk about the ones that are not aware, right? So when someone's aware, and I imagine the steps are the same, that you would go see their primary care doctor, and then the primary care doctor will do an assessment, and then they would refer them to a neurologist, right? That's kind of the general path that one would take. Yeah. And so they're aware of this, you're having conversations. I feel, and I'd love to know your opinion, that people that are aware, it would be easier to say, hey, mom, hey, dad, I'm really concerned. How would you feel about making an appointment with your doctor and we can go have a conversation? And so what are your thoughts on that?
Most of the time, yes. It depends, though, a lot on the person's personality as well. Okay. So if someone is fearful of how their family might treat them, whether that's justified or not.
Yeah,
right?
That's how they feel, right? That matters.
They might be aware of the changes, but they might try to cover them up or compensate for them in different ways. And then it can be a little tricky. You have to be very sensitive about how you approach the topic with them. We typically recommend that you approach it from a place of, we want to make sure there's nothing acute that's going on with you, like thyroid disorders or things like that.
Yeah, a urinary tract infection, exactly. Medication changes, things like that.
Yeah, rather than, we think you have Alzheimer's, we need to go to the doctor.
Right. And so for those who are experiencing changes, and they're not aware of it, and the family member is seeing a personality change. I think that's maybe anger, somebody who was super friendly and loving, and now all of a sudden they're more than grumpy, they're angry. How do families deal with that?
It's tough. The most important thing is making sure that that person's doctor has a good full picture of what's going on with them. And it's not always going to be appropriate for that conversation to happen with the person in the room. So we will oftentimes encourage family members to reach out to the doctor privately and share their concerns, whether through a healthcare portal or a phone call or an email, in advance of that person's next regular checkup appointment.
Okay.
So that the doctor knows that this is a concern and that they might want to do a little additional assessment than they normally would without it becoming a conflict in the room at the doctor's office.
Sure. And because of HIPAA, doctors can't talk to you, but they can receive your information. They can receive your call, they can listen, and then take that into account. So I think that's important. I think a lot of people feel like, well, I want to talk to the doctor, but the doctor's not going to talk to me. So just knowing that that's an option, I think is really important for you to understand. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you can even start the conversation with that. When you call, say, look, I know that you can't share information with me and I'm not asking you to. I'm calling you to give you information.
Okay, that's helpful.
Typically well received.
And then what about families who don't know who their parent's doctor is? That happens because they keep their information so tight to the chest that it's hard to figure that out.
It is. And some people also haven't been seen by a doctor in a very long time, or they don't have a primary care physician in place. And that's much harder to navigate because you're in a position then where you have to convince that person to see a doctor. We will typically guide families to approach that conversation at a far distance from the memory concerns and come up with other reasons why it might be a good idea for them to see a doctor.
So they're not on defense.
Right, exactly.
Okay. A lot of people, I know that 1 of 4 individuals in San Diego County specifically who have dementia are living alone. I know that's something close and dear to your heart. So tell me a little bit about why that's important to you, and then I'd love to talk about that.
So that is the population that I most enjoy working with. For a couple of different reasons. I do think that they are kind of uniquely vulnerable in some ways, but they are also incredibly resourceful. In many cases, they are maintaining their independence and their autonomy, and they have figured out ways to do that despite their memory and cognitive impairments. But there's lots of kind of unique concerns that arise with folks who live alone, safety concerns and things like that.
Would you say the majority of the time they don't have family nearby, or is it that their family isn't aware of this? Like, what's the cause of them living alone and with dementia? Not the cause of the dementia, but living alone, yeah.
About 75% of the clients that we have served at my organization that live alone have some sort of a care partner. That might be a family member, but we see a lot more informal care partners with that population. So a neighbor who kind of stepped up and took on some responsibility, or an old friend or a nephew or something like that. We see a lot of that, but about a quarter of them have no one. And so they're very isolated.
So what happens when their dementia progresses and you are aware, like you have a relationship with them? What's the next step for them? Like, how does the government or who would step in at that point? What authority is there to protect these people?
The really unfortunate answer to that is that there is no safety net. I think that's what you're describing.
Yeah.
There's not a safety net. So depending on whether that person has financial resources, which the cost of care is so exorbitant that most people can't afford it. Unless they have financial resources, it's typically not a good outcome. Most of the time, the family is in a position, or we are, if we're the only ones involved, where the safety concerns are raising over time, becoming more extreme as their cognition is declining. And it's just really important to keep as many eyes on that situation as possible as those safety concerns rise, and then wait for an opportunity for something to change. And that opportunity usually comes in the form of a hospitalization.
Okay. So for family members who are not living in the same area as their parents, let's say, and let's say a parent has dementia, what resources are available to those adult children who live out of area and they have concerns about their loved one?
So if their parent is living here in San Diego, they can call my organization. The other options are, I think care managers are a really wonderful resource. It is important to note, though, that insurance doesn't typically cover those services, so you do have to pay out of pocket. It's typically an hourly rate. But care managers can come in, do an assessment of the person, and then kind of coordinate with the family who's out of town about resources and things that need to be put in place for that person to be safe at home.
Okay. And so you coordinate that appointment with the care manager? Do you have a list of resources for care managers? Okay.
We do, yeah.
Okay. Now, family that lives in town and they have their family member or even a spouse is concerned about, their husband or their wife. What do you typically see when people come into Alzheimer's San Diego? Like what would you say is the most common situation?
With people living alone or just more broadly?
Just more broadly, families, married couples with one spouse having dementia or a daughter being concerned about a father or a mother, just in general, what are you seeing more often?
In terms of the family makeup and how things...
Yeah.
So interestingly, we serve a lot of spousal caregivers. So I would say that's
support? Like a support group? Is that what you mean?
We spousal, as in the spouse who's caring for the person with dementia. They are the most common family member that would be reaching out to us for support. But we do have a lot of adult children as well, and then occasionally we'll find scenarios where there's more of an informal person in place.
Okay. So my mother-in-law has dementia, and years back we attended a class, and at that time I learned that there are more than 60 types of dementia. So Alzheimer's is talked about a lot. I was really surprised to find out that there are that many different variations. And so when somebody comes in, really, they're all just searching for help for dementia, but yet you're a specialist in Alzheimer's. So what is is that the primary focus, Alzheimer's, of your classes that you offer? Or am I correct in that it's dementia just across the board?
Dementia across the board.
Okay.
So we see families dealing with all those different 60 types of dementia.
Okay. And are there, tell me a little bit more about your support groups, like what is being offered and what's ongoing, what's new, what's changing, what kind of classes are available?
So we have classes and support groups which are sort of separate in terms of what they are meant to accomplish for the folks who are participating. For our support groups, those are peer support groups. So they are filled with caregivers who are there to receive support, but also to offer it. And it's wonderful to witness. I facilitate a support group myself, and it is one of my favorite parts of my job is getting to see that connection and people who have such an empty cup still going and pouring and filling other people's cups. So we offer in-person support groups and online support groups. The in-person groups are all over the county. We really try to make it as accessible as possible. And those typically meet twice a month, most of them, and a few of them once a month. And then we have classes.
Okay.
And our classes are really geared towards providing education to caregivers on a range of topics, from legal planning to managing personality changes.
Okay. And so it's more of a training. The classes are more training?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What do you think people most misunderstand about dementia?
Ooh, I love this question. I think the most common misconception is probably that it's a normal part of aging, that everyone experiences memory changes as they age. And that's one of the more dangerous misconceptions, because it will sometimes create situations where a diagnosis isn't obtained in a timely manner, resources aren't put in place in a timely manner, because families don't realize how serious things are until they escalate.
So what are some situations where you can, like, what advice can you give right now? Someone who's listening, they have a loved one at home who has dementia and they're seeing things progress. What safety nets can they put in place in their home to protect that person from a fall, from the oven, leaving the oven on, like things that as their dementia progresses and it gets more dangerous for them to be at home, what are some things that can be put in place to support them?
That's a great question. As far as home safety goes, we at my organization, we use a checklist, and I've seen lots of dementia-oriented organizations have similar things that kind of identifies the hazards that can exist in a home for people with dementia. A fall risk is probably the most common thing that people are concerned about, especially in San Diego, where homes have stairs. There's so many stairs, especially in certain parts of the county. So there's lots of products on the market now, and I feel like there's new ones every year, which is really nice to encourage safety at home.
Tell me more about that. What type of products come to mind when you say that?
So for fall risk, specifically, there are devices that will detect a fall. Okay. I don't think a lot of people realize that. They think about Life Alert, right? The commercials where you're on the ground and the button, but for people with dementia at a certain stage, they will not be able to follow the steps of pushing a button. So having something that detects falls is fantastic. And I think some of the Apple Watch models can even do that now, which is wonderful.
It's like an alert system that is built in, and it will call out to the alert company. Exactly. Yes.
So you don't have to initiate that, which is wonderful. People are also very concerned about fires, reasonably so. And they have now even automatic stove shutoff valves that you can purchase. So if a stove gets left on, after a certain amount of time, it will shut off on its own.
My curling iron has that.
Oh, yeah.
My husband's happy about that.
Yeah, I bet. And then, dementia-friendly stove knob covers and things like that to prevent fires.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. When does it make sense for somebody not to be at home anymore?
That's a great question, because it's sort of an ethical dilemma, right? Your families are typically weighing safety with autonomy, and that is a really tough position to be in.
And I know I said, when does it make sense? I'm sure it never makes sense, right? It's because it is such an emotional decision. But when is it safer for them not to be home? I guess that's more where I'm going with that. And if you can get in-home care from a professional, and you can afford that, that's great. And then your loved one can stay in the home longer. But I guess my biggest concern about this is that spouses tend to be, as the caregiver, their health declines as a result, and respite is available. And there's, so I'm curious what respite resources that you can share, because a lot of people don't know about respite, or they don't feel like they can leave their loved one with a stranger. And so how do you remedy that, just for the caregiver to get a little bit more relief?
Yeah, I think a lot of families, what they will do is they'll ratchet up the amount of care that's in place as the safety concerns rise to delay placement if they are thinking that they're going to move their person into a care facility at some point. So there are a lot of in-home care options. The cost of care, as I mentioned before, is rising and is becoming really a barrier for a lot of families. But there are some programs through nonprofit organizations and through California's version of Medicaid, which is called Medi-Cal, that can provide some of that relief for families, whether it's in-home care or adult daycare. And so we can guide people on what all those options are.
Okay. And so so they would just contact you, they would share their situation, and then you can tell them what resources are available accordingly.
Yeah, exactly. Because it does vary a lot depending on what their specific needs are. But it's important to just know that there are resources, because a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah. How do you help families when they're stuck in that wait and see mode? What does that look like?
It's tough. Some families are in that mode because they have to be. For example, if you are an adult child of someone with dementia and you don't have power of attorney and you don't have an advanced healthcare directive for that person, and they are resistant to getting those things in place, you are a little bit stuck. And sometimes you have to just try to keep a really close eye on the situation until something changes and you can step in. But for other families, I think it's just really, if they have all the right things in place, power of attorney, and they're able to make decisions, but they just feel stuck and they don't know what is the best decision, I always recommend peer support for those folks, to talk to other caregivers who have had to make those decisions, or even just people who have been caregivers and have had to make really heavy decisions. Because I think that's what causes people to feel that like stuckness.
I think it's easier, from my experience, it's easier when either if it's a married couple or a couple and one person has dementia, definitely if the spouse has a relationship with the child and they're working together to support the person with dementia. But I experienced firsthand, my father-in-law was coming to us, myself, my husband, his children, and saying, I need help. And then we would step in to try to give support. And then he became protective in that moment. Or he would call and he would put the phone on speaker. So we couldn't give him support or advice because we knew that she was listening. And so we weren't trying to be, deceiving or, work behind my mother-in-law's back. It was just that he was asking for support, and then we would go to talk to him, and then he'd put the phone on speaker, So it was like it worked against us helping him. And they were living alone for a while, together, alone, right? And we wanted them to move down to San Diego from the outskirts of San Diego. And we realized there was nothing we could do because they had autonomy and they weren't ready to move to San Diego, closer to the hospitals, closer to family. And we finally just had to just say, okay, there's nothing I can do. And I think when we reach that point of there's nothing we can do until they want more support or support in a different way, that's when I felt a lot more at ease, because it was just like, okay, there's nothing I can do. Because you go into action mode. You go into, I'm going to try to fix this. I'm going to try to help. And it's frustrating when you get resistance.
Right.
But when you realize it's not up to you and you just have to let it play out, then there is a little bit of freedom in that. And it's worrisome because you don't want them to fall. You don't want them to drive when they shouldn't be driving. So anyway, I guess that's my experience with it on one hand, with one side of my family. Yeah.
And I think caregivers are so hard on themselves sometimes, and they feel the weight of the world, and they feel that if something bad happens to their person, that it's their fault. And I wish I could just take that from them, because it is so hard to step in and to provide support to folks who aren't ready to accept it yet. And there's not much you can do. You can adjust your approach a little bit, and we're always happy to guide people on how to do that. But ultimately, people have autonomy, and even if they have a diagnosis of dementia, it doesn't change that.
So let's talk about the diagnosis of dementia versus mild cognitive impairment. They're different, right? Yeah. And so you can have mild cognitive impairment and still make legal decisions, financial decisions for yourself, until you have that diagnosis, right? And then even that diagnosis, if the diagnosis is even mild cognitive impairment, you're still not, you still haven't lost capacity. So how do you, any advice that you have to people that thinks that, well, your loved one can't make any decisions because they're showing signs of dementia, but they're not, they're in early stages?
Yeah, the diagnosis, mild cognitive impairment, I think just bears this ambiguity that is really frustrating for a lot of families. So that diagnosis, when it is given, the folks who receive it, only about half of them will go on to later receive a formal diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or some other dementia, and the other half don't. So there's no guarantee that the cognitive impairment is going to progress.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is fascinating to me. So And even once someone gets a formal diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia, that still doesn't change their legal capacity. Mm-hmm. And we have lots of clients who are in the early stages and are incredibly independent and incredibly capable, mm-hmm. even with that diagnosis.
Okay, and it brings awareness and it helps create an opportunity for more conversations about your future wishes and getting those healthcare directive and power of attorney for financial in place, for finances in place. And that's what I encourage most people to do. It's like, ideally, before you even have signs of dementia, I encourage everybody to go and get their documents in order, right? I've just seen so many. You lose control over making decisions for yourself when you don't have those in place, and having those conversations with your family about what your wishes are. I mean, I know that as we age, it becomes harder and harder because people think that those conversations are being had because they think that you think that they're going to die tomorrow. And it's like, the reality is we're all going to die. And whether you're young or you're old, nobody knows when that's going to be. So it's important to have those conversations about what your wishes are so that your wishes can be met, right? And sometimes I know it's hard to imagine, like, well, I don't know, there might be different scenarios, but there's a general baseline of decisions that can be made by you while you have this, this ability to make these decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I often encourage people to put an advanced healthcare directive in place. Even very young caregivers, anyone over the age of 18 should have that document in place, because there is a possibility for all of us that we could be in a scenario where we can't verbally voice our wishes. Mm-hmm. And it's really a gift to the people around you that you love to have documented those wishes so that they don't feel that weight of the world, right, trying to make decisions for you.
And my father had given me power of attorney, and before he passed, and even then, I still wanted to go to him to make the final decisions because it was a heavy weight on me, even when I had that designation. So it's helpful that if you can continue to speak your wishes, for sure. Now, there's different stages of dementia. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned to me on another conversation that there's mild, mid, and late stage dementia, mm-hmm. and that's how you deal with it with your, I guess. We don't call them clients. Who do you call your clients? Okay. So, but I know there's a different diagnosis based on stages, like 1 through 7. Mm-hmm. And so tell me a little bit about the difference between early, mid, and late stage ideas versus the stages of 7, right?
Yeah, the stages of 7, that is the FAST scale, and don't ask me what that acronym stands for, but it's used very heavily in medical settings. Okay. And most notably, it's used to determine if someone qualifies for hospice services or not. But it's very granular and broken out. So when we are speaking to families, we will typically talk of things in terms of early, middle, and late, because that's much easier for families to grasp and understand.
Than a number, right?
Right, yeah. And then they feel a little bit better prepared for what's next, because they're not thinking, oh, I'm going to have to prepare 6 more times. It's, just 1,
Sure.
2, 3.
So what does mid-stage look like?
So that is when someone begins needing help with activities of daily living. Okay. So things like toileting, bathing, eating, stuff like that.
And it happens that early.
Yeah, it starts at the beginning of middle stage. We see a lot of folks who need verbal help. They need reminders. They need prompting. They need someone to sit with them and walk them through the steps of eating a meal or preparing a meal or taking a shower. And then it progresses through the middle stage to the point where they need kind of hands-on help, right? They need someone to dress them. They need someone to wash their hair.
And so then how does that differ then from late stage?
So in late stage, someone's fully dependent for all activities of daily living, okay. and they can't be left unsupervised.
Okay, so that's the difference. So middle stage, they can be left for short periods of time or long periods of time, depending, right, on their situation. And then late stage, it's not safe to be left alone at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Depending on someone's symptoms, especially if wandering is a concern, it might be the case that even in middle stage, it's no longer safe. Okay. It varies quite a bit.
And so how does, I guess, what's involved with a doctor determining what type of dementia you have? I mean, I know that's more medical, but I'm just kind of curious what you've seen over the years.
Yeah, and I'm a social worker, so I can't speak to I'm not a doctor. I always give that caveat, but it depends on the type of dementia. Typically, when memory concerns are first observed, someone will go to their primary care physician. They'll do a brief memory screening. So those are those 5-minute tests where they make you draw the clock or they ask
the president,
all that stuff. And then if the results of that are concerning, they'll do additional testing like blood work and things like that. They might do an MRI depending on the doctor. And then if they haven't been able to figure out like a physiological reason for the concerns, then they refer out, like you were saying, to a neurologist. And then the neurologist will determine what testing is needed based on that person's medical history, their risk factors. They might have a suspicion about whether it's Alzheimer's or vascular dementia, for example. If someone has a history of stroke or heart attack, they might do different testing because they suspect vascular dementia. That's my understanding.
Okay. And you can have more than one type of dementia.
Oh, yes, you can. Yeah, we refer to that as mixed dementia.
Okay. And then if someone is going to move into memory care, what are your recommendations for that transition for the person with dementia? Like, should the family have a conversation with the loved one about, hey, we're moving you? Or, I know what our situation was. I'm just curious if you have a standard protocol for how this is managed or best tips on how to manage moving them into memory care.
I wish we had a standard, like a manual that we could give to people, but it depends so much on the personality. There are some just kind of best practices, though, that apply to most families. If a person is at a point where memory care is appropriate, it is most likely not going to be appropriate to have a very direct conversation about what's happening because they're going to struggle to comprehend it. And it's probably just going to cause a lot of undue stress and anxiety for them. The transition, I think, can be made a little smoother in a couple of ways. The first is working closely with the staff at the memory care, because it might be, as the family, it's your first time doing this, but the memory care staff do it day in and day out, and they are experts at helping people adjust. So that's really important, that they know what this person's personality is like, easy ways to connect with them, ways to make them feel comfortable in the new setting so that they feel prepared to manage the transition. And then the second thing is to try to make that person's new living space as similar as possible to their old one. So bringing in items that are meaningful to them, decorations, comfort items like blankets and things like that so that they feel at home.
So when we moved my mother into memory care, it was after COVID, and we had lost my stepfather. He had COVID in September of 2020, so it was before the vaccinations. And she was living at home with him, and we lost him. And so she moved into memory care out of necessity. And we had her whole bedroom, her whole apartment. It was the same bed, right? The same bedding. Mm-hmm. And in their house, she would be in bed a lot. She was a school teacher, so she came home and she would put on her pajamas and after dinner pretty much just crawl into bed and watch, TV or whatever. And so in the memory care in her apartment, I called her once and I was like, oh, so what are you doing, Mom? She's like, oh, well, my stepdad, his name was Stoney. Stoney's downstairs watching football. And I was like, oh, okay, that's great. So, she was in her bed, so she was very comfortable. She just thought she was in her original bedroom, which gave me a lot of comfort to know that she just didn't know, So that was good. So having their environment be similar to their original home environment is very important. How else can the environment, are there any other things that you can recommend to make that person feel comfortable in their new environment?
I think really just making it individualized based on their needs and preferences is really important. So if you know, for example, that your mom always has cold feet and wears socks at home to make sure that she has a supply of those thick winter socks available.
Yeah.
Those little things, I think, matter so much to make people feel at home in a new setting.
Mm-hmm. We had like a door hanger on her door that had a picture of her and her name. Mm-hmm. So that way when she's walking in the hallway, she would know right how to find her room. And then also I think it's important to make their space comfortable for the adult children or the spouse, mm-hmm. so that when you go visit her, you're comfortable. I think that's really important so that you can have that quality time with your loved one and relax as much as you can. You know, those little mini refrigerators are great because you don't have to feel like you're bothering anybody, and you can stay longer because if you need something, it's right there. You know, it's not about you, but if you're comfortable, then you're likely to spend more time with them. Mm-hmm. And then also, you know, taking them out. You can visit in the new residence, but taking them out, while it's still safe, taking them to a restaurant or just giving them a new environment, I think is really great. I used to take my mom we'd drive around town and I would play the radio, but I had the choice to choose whatever song I wanted. So I chose music from her era, mm-hmm. and we just drove around and at that point in time, she could no longer speak. Which I didn't know that aphasia was part of many types of dementia. So she stopped talking, but it was fun because I could tell she was happy and looking out the window. So I think getting them out of that environment it's really helpful.
Yeah, for a lot of people, the visits outside of the facility are still very much appropriate. And some facilities even have outings and things so that people don't get that cabin fever. They don't feel like they're, in the same environment all the time.
Yeah, that's good. So before somebody moves their loved one to memory care, often there's burnout, right? They're doing their best. They feel guilty. Nobody wants their parents to be in memory care. Sometimes it's just a reality of what has to happen. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of guilt. I know I felt a lot of guilt, and there were 4 children. Well, long story, but there were 4 girls that, we were all looking out for my mom, but it just wasn't feasible for her to live with us. And I couldn't bring her out to California because I had 3 siblings back in Iowa, right? Mm-hmm. So just circumstances are that was the best and most safe place for her, but there's still guilt, right? Whether you know you're doing the right thing for them or not. I'm just curious more about what support you have in place, either for burnout, for caregiver burnout. I mean, talk more about your peer groups and what conversations are had, because people might know that, well, I know there's a peer group. I know I can call and join, but that's not for me, mm-hmm. right? So maybe you have a story or two that you could share that came from somebody that went to the support group and how they benefited from that, like what the outcome was. So that they know, because I want people who are listening to know that it's maybe it's different than what they're expecting. Maybe it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all have kind of a idea of what a support group is. And for people who have never attended one, that idea in their head is probably shaped by movies and TV shows, and most of that is inaccurate. So I always tell people when I'm speaking to them and trying to get them to buy into the idea of attending a group, that it's not people in a room crying together for an hour and a half. It is people. Yes, there are tears. There's also frustration and anger, and there's also laughter, and there's joy. It's the full range of emotion. And oftentimes people, once they start attending a group, they will share just that they didn't realize how isolated they were. And even people who have a really good support system in place, mm-hmm. they might have lots of friends and colleagues and family members who have always supported them and loved them, but none of those people have been a caregiver. And so they have all the best intentions, but they're just not able to provide the type of support that caregiver needs now, whereas the people in our support groups can, and they will. And it's so beautiful to watch it happen.
That's nice. And yes, laughter is so important, especially through, because it's very stressful. It's very concerning. I mean, siblings, there can be family dynamics that are playing into this, and arguments, and conflict comes with this too, because when your stress level rises, then there can be conflict even more so, right? Mm-hmm. So curious what support systems you have in place for families, and maybe two siblings don't agree with the course of action that needs to be taken to protect their mom or their dad.
Yeah, I think it's more common than not. Even when I'm thinking of my own siblings right now, we don't have that much in common. Once you are grown up and you go your separate ways and lead different lives, it can be really hard to manage a really stressful, really challenging, really emotional situation like a parent with dementia, with these people that you haven't had to work collaboratively with since you were little.
And then you go back to that time of how you worked together when you were 8 and 10, right?
It's not always good. So first of all, it's normal for siblings to not agree. And it doesn't mean that one sibling is the bad sibling or the heartless sibling. It's normal. And sometimes it's really helpful to have an unbiased, neutral professional step in and facilitate a conversation. So
that'd be an elder law attorney, or when you say a professional, who might that be?
So in my organization, we host family meetings, which is a one-time meeting where we can sit with a family and help them prioritize what needs their attention and care plan together, even if there's some challenging dynamics. Yeah. But care managers are also known for doing this, and they can do it on a more long-term basis, where they come in, they will assess the person with dementia without any input. So their assessment is unbiased and neutral, and then they will sit down with the family and make recommendations based on that assessment. So no one's intentions are called into question, which happens frequently between siblings.
Okay, that's helpful. And then as far as advice, what advice would you give to somebody earlier in the journey? Just you've seen so many different pathways of how different types of dementia can go, and someone's in the early stage, and what advice would you give to the family?
If I had to give just one piece of advice, it would be that managing a dementia diagnosis is a marathon. It's not a sprint. For caregivers especially, it's really important to be mindful of your bandwidth and to take things one step at a time. And there's challenges in prioritizing and know which thing belongs at which step, and that's where you should reach out and ask for help, whether it's to us. Again, there's lots of really wonderful nonprofits that can help families with these types of things for free.
How do they find those resources?
So every single county in the whole country has an area agency on aging. And these are kind of the resource hubs for anyone that's dealing with anything related to aging. Dementia is one of the most common things. So you can just Google, what is my area agency on aging, and find that one. So for San Diego County, it's Aging and Independent Services, but every county has one. And they can direct you then and say, Alzheimer San Diego can help you with a family meeting, and this other nonprofit can give you respite and that sort of thing.
Okay, that's really helpful to know, because not everybody listening is in San Diego, right? We have anybody around the world can be listening to this right now. That's really helpful. What about families who correct the person with dementia, or they ask them, don't you remember, or things like that? What are examples of things that you see that would be helpful for the loved one to be hearing right now on how they handle and how they treat the person with dementia?
So that is probably in the top 3 topics that people will call us for help with, because it's really challenging. So the first thing I always say to someone that's bringing this up to me is, cut yourself a little slack. It's okay if you've been doing this wrong so far, especially with a parent, because you've been interacting with this person one way for quite literally your entire life. And now I'm going to come in and ask you to change everything about how you interact. Quizzing someone with dementia is never helpful. It's not that they don't want to remember, it's that they can't. So you won't get anywhere doing that. And it does not help them retain cognition either, which some people think.
Because once you've lost it, it's gone.
Right.
Yeah.
And challenging, the other thing you had asked about was like challenging someone or correcting them.
Correcting someone. Yeah. Or like, it's different. Finishing sentences is one thing, but well, maybe not. So somebody with dementia with word recall issues might be having a hard time. And in that case, it could be helpful to finish their sentence. Yeah. But then somebody who's talking slow, but they have the words and you want to get to the end, like, how does somebody handle that when they're impatient and they just want to get to the end? Like, where's that balance in caring for your loved one?
You just have to slow down if you want to hear what they have to say. Mm-hmm. And it's important that you do, because they're not going to be able to share with you what they are thinking
much longer.
Right. So, I'm a very fast talker, and it took me quite a long time to slow my pace as I began working with older adults, but I have found that it is worth it. If you're willing to take the extra time and to pause and to be comfortable with a little bit of silence in the conversation, it's pretty incredible what you can get back.
Yeah. I found that, we're all in this rat race called work, right? Mm-hmm. And you go, and you raise your kids and your parents are living independently. And then one day it's like, oh, well, mom or dad needs my help, right? And you still want to go at the same pace, but slowing down makes a huge difference and allowing time. So if you're a spouse and you're trying to get to dinner, you have a dinner reservation and you're still going out, right? And you have to be there in 15 minutes. You need to give yourself maybe 30 to give time for them to walk slowly to the car, to go at their pace. So you have to allot the time to be patient. Because if you're in a hurry, you're going to be that less patient, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And you can set up the environment to your benefit also. So if you know, for example, that the person you're caring for is really particular about what they wear when they go out in public, if they have a closet stocked full of clothes, how long do you think it's going to take them to get ready?
That's a great
Whereas if they have a closet that has 3 shirts, 3 pairs of pants, the fewer the choices, the easier it is for people with dementia to maintain their autonomy and be able to, make decisions, but not feel overwhelmed.
Okay. Yeah. So my parents grew up with, this is on your plate, you eat it. And I kind of grew up somewhat that way, but I was given more choices. And now my children, I give them lots of choices. But now thinking back to somebody with dementia, the less choices are actually better, because when you give people too many choices, it can get very confusing. So anyway, I'm just kind of relating that to my own growing up. I'm sure other people can relate to that in just different eras, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's interesting. Take away some of the, empty some of the closet into another closet, right? Mm-hmm. And keep things simple, and empty some of the drawers so it's not so cluttered, so that they can go and find their toothbrush easier, right? Yeah. Because that's kind of what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Good. What about meals? I know as people get older, one of the first signs could be that that they're not eating properly, they're not getting the right nutrition, or they're not taking the right medications, they're not taking it on a timely, system.
Yeah, meals, it is very much dependent on the person, but some of the things we see with dementia is people will forget to eat, not eat enough. Mm-hmm. People will have changes in their inhibition and overeat. We see that too sometimes. Okay. A little bit less common than forgetting. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing we see is that people are very indulgent. They want things that are super sweet, or comfort foods, and care less about eating nutritious foods.
Got it. Yeah. So my recommendation would be to first kind of do a safety assessment of if you're going in to visit your parents, and maybe you're there every week, maybe they're there once a month. Everybody has different schedules. Maybe they live out of state. But when you get that opportunity to go in, do that safety assessment, look around, because it's easy, I think, at early onset dementia to hide a lot. when my dad had cancer, he wasn't feeling great. Then we had a visitor come over and he would perk right up and he looked great. And then they left and then he went back to how he was really feeling, right? And so similar with dementia, it's easy to hide in the beginning. And so you want to be aware of is there old food in the refrigerator? Looking at their pill box, are the days empty that are supposed to be empty? And then if you notice signs, then you want to then have those conversations. And those conversations can happen at any time. But, Mom, Dad, I'm concerned about you. How would you feel if we had a conversation on Wednesday night? I'd like to come over and talk to you. So just things like that. I think those are the first two steps in any situation, is kind of assess, going with curiosity as opposed to going in and telling them this is how it's going to be, right? So that you don't put them on the defense. And just, I think sharing how you feel with your parent or your spouse can be really important. And I think then they're likely going to be it's likely that they'll be more likely to be open to your conversation with them and what your concerns are. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So before we go, tell me a little bit about your background. I didn't get into it in the beginning because I feel like when people are listening, they're like, I just want to get to the meaty stuff. But your situation and why you're doing what you're doing, I think is also really important to share with people.
Sure. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I've been working with older adults and people with disabilities for about 13 years now. And I just fell in love with it when I was in college pursuing my bachelor's in social work, and I never will leave this population. I just find it so rewarding to get to sit with people who have these incredible memories and experiences that us younger folks didn't get to have, and to just learn from them.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Mm-hmm. So.
They had time to time seminar like meeting.
Mm-hmm. But, well, you were mentioning that there were meetings all over the county. Yes. So maybe he's thinking about a meeting. So how are those locations determined?
So the caregiver support groups, we have most of those at libraries, churches, places like that. We also offer classes all throughout the county, and those are mostly at libraries. I don't know which library would be closest to you off the top of my head.
University City, there's two. There's one on Governor Drive, and then there's also one up off of Nobel.
We do not present at either of those libraries, so I would have to look at other neighborhoods nearby.
Okay.
If you're comfortable, I can give you my contact information.
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
And email.
Email? You got it.
Okay. And folks, do you have any questions that we could answer, either one of us?
No, I think you covered a lot of what I wanted to hear. Okay. The one thing that I'm wondering is, how do you set resources up for a caregiver that may predecease the person needing memory care when there aren't friends or family available to kind of provide that?
Yeah, so I can start with an answer. So my recommendation would be to talk to an elder care attorney. So there are estate planning attorneys and there are elder care attorneys. And an elder care attorney can establish your trust documents, your estate plan, just as an estate planning attorney can. But an elder law attorney looks at all phases of your life all the way through death. And so they can make sure that your plans are in place and they're looking at the whole picture. And it's kind of like they have an exit plan, if you will. And so they would be able to give you advice based on your own specific situation, your own finances, and they could tell you what resources are available specific to your type of dementia and type of and situation. Yeah.
I think the other thing that's really important is if the caregiver has any sort of chronic health issues, or there's a concern, right, that they might have a medical emergency, like you're saying, that you have a vial of life in the home for both the care partner and the person with dementia. Because in that scenario, what would happen is probably paramedics would come out and transport the caregiver away. It's really important that those paramedics know that the other person in the house has dementia. And the best way to communicate that is with a vial of life, which is a plastic, I don't know if you're familiar, it's a plastic sleeve with a document inside. The county gives them out for free, and that document has all of your pertinent medical information, and it even has a little checkbox for this person has dementia or Alzheimer's. So then the paramedics could, raise the alarm and make sure that that person with dementia is not just left in the home.
And the vial of life is something that the fire department, when they go to your home, they look at the refrigerator. That's one of the places they're going to go, because that's consistent in every home. And also the pulse, the physician's order for life-sustaining treatment, which is a physician's order. So they have to follow that. It's not just a do not resuscitate, and that choice, it has some other things on it, feeding tube and respirator decisions on there. So some people have that, and that's on their refrigerator. And it's pink, if I remember correctly. So those are just pieces of information that if there's an emergency, they're going to look there first. Yes?
I'm married to a guy who loves to put everything on the computer and not in paper, and throws away paper because it doesn't apply, and everybody can find it on the computer. When those firefighters or those emergency responders come to the house or come to the location, how are they going to access materials that he's put away on a computer?
They're not. So I understand the society is the way society is now is that paper is bad and computer is efficient. So I get that, but that's why the pulse or the vial of life are both really important to have on your refrigerator. They're not pretty, but you can put it on the side of your refrigerator, and so it's like some sides have magnetic spaces on it as well, because stainless steel often isn't magnetic. So maybe there's a compromise that you can make where there's certain information that is available, and then somebody knows where the passwords are.
Right.
Yeah. So that's common.
It's a very awkward and difficult situation.
Well, the solution is to have the pertinent information available, and then your private information private. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. If this episode gave even a little bit of clarity, I hope that you can share it with a friend or a sibling or another loved one. And please follow us so that we can help you with whatever's going to come next. Thank you for joining the Agent Parent Care Plan.